What if the darkest chapter in human history was not a single event, but a pattern repeated across civilizations separated by thousands of years? From the blazing ruins of Baghdad to the silent gas chambers of Auschwitz, countless empires claimed victory while leaving unimaginable suffering behind. Each massacre began with a different reason, yet they all revealed the terrifying consequences of absolute power without restraint. Hidden within forgotten chronicles, survivor testimonies, and ancient monuments are stories that still challenge how we understand civilization itself. Before this journey ends, you may discover that humanity's greatest enemy has never been a single empire, but the choices people make when fear and power collide. History often remembers great empires for their victories, but their darkest legacies were often written in the blood of ordinary people. Across more than 2,000 years, powerful rulers repeatedly used terror as a weapon to crush resistance and secure absolute control. Long before modern international law existed, entire cities could disappear in a matter of days after refusing to surrender. One of the most devastating examples unfolded in the thriving city of Baghdad during the height of the Islamic Golden Age. By the middle of the 13th century, Baghdad stood as one of the richest, largest, and most influential centers of learning in the world. Its legendary House of Wisdom preserved priceless works of science, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and literature gathered from countless civilizations. In early February of the year 1258, Hulagu Khan led the Mongol army to the walls of the city with overwhelming military strength. Caliph al-Mustasim believed Baghdad's massive fortifications and historical prestige would discourage a full-scale assault from the approaching invaders. That confidence quickly vanished as Mongol engineers surrounded the city with siege weapons designed to break even the strongest defenses. After less than 2 weeks of relentless attacks, Baghdad's walls were breached, opening the gates to one of history's most infamous conquests. What followed was not simply a military victory, but a deliberate campaign intended to eliminate resistance through overwhelming fear and destruction. Homes, marketplaces, mosques, libraries, and public buildings became scenes of unimaginable violence as panic spread through every neighborhood. Countless manuscripts that had preserved centuries of human knowledge were destroyed, symbolizing the collapse of an extraordinary intellectual tradition. Chroniclers later described the Tigris River as darkened by ink from ruined books, creating one of history's most enduring images of cultural devastation. The destruction of Baghdad echoed far beyond the battlefield because it weakened a civilization that had shaped science and scholarship for generations. Yet Baghdad was not the first city to experience such calculated brutality at the hands of a determined empire seeking complete domination. More than 12 centuries earlier, Roman forces had surrounded Jerusalem after years of rebellion, setting the stage for another catastrophic siege. Hunger, disease, and desperation gradually consumed the trapped population before the city's defenses finally collapsed beneath relentless Roman pressure. These tragedies reveal that ancient warfare often targeted entire societies rather than only opposing armies, leaving scars that endured for centuries. As the centuries unfolded, new empires would embrace even more terrifying methods, proving that organized cruelty continued to evolve alongside human civilization. While ancient chronicles often emphasized spectacular brutality, surviving evidence reveals a more complex picture that historians continue to examine with great care. Assyrian palace reliefs from Nineveh vividly portray the siege of Lachish, displaying prisoners, deportations, and executions as deliberate instruments of psychological warfare. These carved stone panels were not merely historical records, but carefully crafted propaganda designed to warn every neighboring kingdom against rebellion. Royal inscriptions proudly described harsh punishments, demonstrating that fear itself had become one of the empire's most effective military strategies. Centuries later, violence assumed an entirely different purpose within the powerful religious traditions of the Aztec Empire in central Mexico. During the dedication of the expanded Great Temple, thousands of captives were reportedly sacrificed in ceremonies honoring the gods and reinforcing imperial authority. Modern historians continue debating the exact number of victims because surviving Spanish accounts, indigenous traditions, and archaeological evidence do not always agree. Even so, discoveries of skull racks and ceremonial remains confirm that human sacrifice occupied a significant place within Aztec political and religious life. The transition into the modern colonial era did not reduce human suffering, but instead introduced new systems of organized economic exploitation. In the Congo Free State, the rubber became the foundation of extraordinary wealth, while entire communities endured impossible production quotas, enforced through relentless terror. Official reports, missionary accounts, photographs, and eyewitness testimony documented amputations, hostage-taking, executions, and widespread abuse against civilians. The practice of collecting severed hands became one of the most disturbing symbols associated with Leopold II's colonial administration. Although scholars continue debating the precise death toll, there is broad agreement that millions of Congolese suffered under this brutal regime. Only a few decades later, another tragedy unfolded in the enclosed garden of Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar during growing resistance to British rule. Brigadier General Reginald Dyer ordered his soldiers to fire directly into an unarmed crowd without first giving people an opportunity to disperse. Survivors described scenes of panic as families searched desperately for safety inside a space with almost no practical escape routes. British investigations acknowledged the shooting, yet official casualty figures remained far lower than estimates presented by many Indian witnesses and researchers. That disagreement over the numbers illustrates how historical memory is often shaped by politics, perspective, and the availability of reliable evidence. Across these different civilizations, the surviving records consistently reveal that organized violence sought not only immediate victory, but also lasting psychological domination. As the 20th century advanced, governments would employ expanding bureaucracies and modern technology to transform mass killing into an even more systematic enterprise. The 20th century demonstrated that humanity no longer needed conquering armies alone to produce unimaginable destruction on an unprecedented scale. Powerful governments increasingly relied upon bureaucracy, transportation networks, detailed records, and industrial efficiency to eliminate entire populations with chilling precision. Under Joseph Stalin, forced collectivization was presented as an economic transformation intended to modernize agriculture throughout the Soviet Union. In practice, countless farming families were branded enemies of the state, stripped of their property, and deported to distant labor camps. Entire communities disappeared into overcrowded trains that carried men, women, and children toward harsh settlements across Siberia and other remote regions. The tragedy deepened when Soviet authorities confiscated grain, restricted movement, and imposed policies that contributed directly to the catastrophic Holodomor famine. Most historians agree that millions perished, although debates continue regarding the precise legal definition of the famine and the extent of deliberate intent. Even with continuing scholarly discussion, surviving government documents, demographic research, and eyewitness testimony reveal the devastating human cost beyond dispute. Only a few years later, Nazi Germany expanded the machinery of state power into an organized system of industrialized genocide, unlike anything previously recorded. The Wannsee Conference transformed persecution into coordinated administrative policy, assigning government agencies specific roles within the so-called final solution. Railways transported deportees across occupied Europe according to carefully prepared schedules that treated human lives as logistical calculations rather than individuals. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, selections forced labor, gas chambers, and crematoria operated within a system designed for continuous mass murder. Survivor testimonies captured German documents, photographs, and physical remains provide overwhelming evidence supporting the historical record of the Holocaust. These sources make Holocaust denial impossible to sustain within serious historical scholarship because independent lines of evidence consistently reinforce one another. Looking across every tragedy in this journey, historians identify recurring patterns that transcend differences in culture, geography, religion, and historical period. Dehumanizing language repeatedly allowed governments and military leaders to portray targeted populations as obstacles instead of fellow human beings. Fear, propaganda, and unquestioning obedience then encouraged ordinary individuals to participate in extraordinary acts of cruelty without challenging official authority. Although every event unfolded under unique historical circumstances, Each demonstrates the dangers of concentrated power operating without meaningful accountability. Remembering these catastrophes is not about ranking suffering, but about recognizing the warning signs before violence reaches irreversible proportions. The greatest lesson history offers is that civilizations are ultimately judged not only by the power they achieve, but by the humanity they choose to preserve. After thousands of years of conflict, the greatest question still remains whether humanity has truly learned from the tragedies that shaped its past. The evidence suggests that every civilization, regardless of its power or achievements, can descend into unimaginable cruelty when fear, hatred, and unchecked authority prevail. Remembering these dark chapters is not about preserving anger, but about recognizing the warning signs before history repeats itself in a different form. Somewhere within forgotten ruins, faded documents, and survivor testimonies, countless untold stories still wait to challenge everything we think we know about the past. If you enjoy exploring history through carefully researched stories like this, subscribe to the channel and join us as we uncover more of the world's forgotten mysteries together.